Well, yesterday it was announced that the Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, has been diagnosed with an aggressive form of skin cancer, just months after she was diagnosed with breast cancer.
A spokesperson said that the 64-year-old had several moles removed for analysis while she was undergoing reconstructive surgery following her mastectomy. Now, her medical team is now investigating if the cancer has been caught in the early stages.
And for more, we welcome back Dr. Kieran Kennedy. Good morning, nice to see you. Can we start with the basics? She's been diagnosed with a malignant melanoma. How serious is that?
So potentially really, really serious, and it's so important we're having this talk because melanoma, we have the highest rates here in Australia. But in this case here, it's obviously flagged it to the world, and in this case, the Duchess has been diagnosed with an aggressive form of skin cancer, melanoma, that if not caught early, can spread quite rapidly to other parts of the body, potentially.
Right, through the bloodstream, right? So it's
100%.
So it's on your arm, it's on your back, and that cancer then gets down into your blood.
Invades down deeper into your skin, and once it reaches a blood vessel, for example, absolutely, those cancerous cells can metastasize, as we call it, and move to other areas of the body, and that's where things really get risky.
Yeah, it's dangerous stuff. The Duchess's dad was diagnosed with skin cancer. That was months before his death from a heart attack in 2003. How much of it is sun exposure and how much of it is genetics?
Yeah, really interesting because we often don't think of other potential causes. One of the main risk factors is obviously UV exposure through sun exposure or solariums and different things, but there's definitely a genetic factor here too. So if you have a first-degree relative who's had a melanoma, your risk is increased compared to the general population, and there's a very small number of cases where it's a familial or hereditary form of melanoma that pops up throughout generations as well.
Right, so you encourage people to check themselves over. What are the sort of the red flags? What are we looking for?
Yeah, so it's important to just keep some specific things in mind, and going off A, B, C, D is a good rule and a way to think about it when we're checking ourselves. We should be doing it regularly, like checking breasts for women and checking testes for men. We should be looking at what's happening with our moles in our skin. So A would be checking if it's symmetrical or asymmetrical. If it's different on each side, that's a bit of a flag. We also want to look at the borders of a mole or a spot. If those are jagged or irregular or they're blurry rather than finely kind of demarcated, that can be a flag as well. Keep an eye on the colour of moles. If they're multiple different colours or blotchy rather than just one dark spot, that can be a flag. And a bigger spot or mole is also more risk of turning into a melanoma. And then if anything is changing or new, that's E there on the evolving. We need to really flag whether things are changing, which is why keeping an eye on them regularly is important. If it's growing, bleeding, getting higher, bigger, if it's starting to itch or hurt, all of those should flag seeing your GP ASAP to get it checked.
How often should we be getting a professional skin check? And does it differ, say, if you're an olive skin person as opposed to a fair skin person?
Yeah, so the important thing with melanoma is we have a risk of melanoma regardless of our skin tone, and so it's important to get checked, especially if you have other risk factors like a family history. We should be checking our own skin regularly, every few months or so, and if we have risk factors like that genetic link, if we are fairer skinned, if we've had a history of sunburn or tanning, especially as kids, then we should be getting checked with our GP, I think, is initially a good place to start. Every 6 to 12 months is important to kind of check in and get a skin check.
Australia has one of the highest rates of skin cancer in the world, we know that, and yet I went for a swim on the weekend and there's everyone sunbaking still, right? Still doing that. What's your advice for being sun smart?
So advice would be, number one, to keep this in mind. Australia and New Zealand have the highest rates of melanoma anywhere in the world, and this can be aggressive and deadly if it's not caught early. So we need to be thinking about it. Shade, covering up with clothing, and obviously slapping on the sunscreen are just keys, and you know where to start here. SPF 30 or higher, I would absolutely go for as high as you can. SPF 50, especially with our sun here in Sydney. And so it's just keeping mindful that sun exposure increases the risk and doing what we can. Important to check, and a bit of a flag here as well, is to check in places that aren't necessarily exposed to the sun.
So because sometimes you can find them on like the sole of your feet.
People get them between their toes, between their fingers as well, so a GP or a dermatologist will check in between your fingers and toes. It's keeping this in mind, keeping sun safe and getting it checked really regularly.
Yeah, some really good advice. Thank you, Dr. Kieran.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Doc. Good to see you.